Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome once again to the briefing room. My name is Eric Cavanaugh and I will be your internet-free moderator today. Yes, indeed, yours truly is living back in the caveman days here as my Time Warner cable went out a little bit ago and our backup internet is out too. So I've got my producer, Rebecca Joswick, in Fort Worth, moving the slides for us. And go ahead and move the next slide. So there's a slide about yours truly and enough about me. On to the next slide, which is the mission. As many of you know, the mission of the briefing room is to reveal the essential characteristics of enterprise software. So we take a rather unique approach in how we put on these events. We first decide on topics, different topic every month. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then we invite vendors in to present, but the vendor and the analyst do not coordinate before the show, and there's a reason for that. We are trying to make sure that we shepherd out of this process some very useful information about how these different technologies work. And so what happens is the vendor prepares their slides, the analyst gets a week to review them, prepares a brief response, and then just starts asking questions, hence the live analyst briefing. So next slide. And you can see March is integration month. We do a different topic every month, and that's so that you as an end user can get some good apples-to-apples comparisons of vendors within a particular month. Because let's face it, if you're about to pull the trigger on some kind of enterprise technology, that stuff is typically not inexpensive, and it's really important that you get it right. So we want to make sure that we do everything we can to help you make those decisions in as educated a way as possible. So next slide. So on to integration, folks. This is a really interesting topic. One of the themes that I've been playing around with for a while is stop the madness with ETL. Of course, that refers to extract, transform, load, and it's the way that traditional organizations have moved data around. Of course, we move data out of operational systems into analytical systems. We do all sorts of different integration of the applications between each other with things like message queues and other forms of communication between apps in order to enable highly streamlined processes. But what's happening is that this convergence of several factors is fundamentally changing the architecture of applications today. So if you think about the impact of the cloud, it's a huge impact. You now have all this processing power up there in the cloud, but you have to get to it. And so a lot of the traditional forms of moving data around the enterprise, aka ETL, don't apply as much when you're dealing with integration with the cloud. There you're talking about APIs, application program interfaces. So you have to use a different kind of connection to stitch together these cloud and on-premises environments. And then you have stuff like mobile technology. You have all of this big data that people are talking about these days. And of course, that refers to all these different kinds of data being generated by machinery. Usually a lot of people call it machine-generated data. So you think about all the data coming off of iPhones, coming off of RFID chips, coming out of cell phone towers, coming out of your networks, your systems, and then think about this globally connected world. We're going to hear today about a case study involving Audi where they are literally pulling data in real time out of these cars, which you can imagine is very useful for designing technologies and for refining different pieces of the car, the automobile. Of course, it also means that someone's going to find out how fast you're going, so you might want to slow it down a bit. But so we're going to hear all kinds of interesting things today. So next slide, we see our presenters, Yapaola and Stefan Andreasen. These guys have been around for a while, as you can see, and I've known Stefan for about, 5 years or maybe longer now. He was on one of the very first DM radios we did a long time ago, and I was very impressed with the technology. It was very innovative at the time, and they appear to have simply continued the trend of innovation. So we're going to learn what they're doing that's interesting, and again, it's this new kind of hybrid application and data integration approach, which is a bit strange for some people. It's not the usual way of doing things, but I think we're going to hear some compelling examples of why it's something you may want to explore. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over. Rebecca, if you could push Kapow's first slide and give Stefan the keys to the car. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hi. This is John, actually. I'm going to take it first, Eric. Thanks for the introduction. So Stefan and I are actually going to tag team a little bit here just to keep it interesting. So I'll do a little bit of the first half, and Stefan will jump in at the end here and finish up. So you can, Robin, go to the next, next slide, if you would. I don't know, Stefan's, who's driving you? Okay. So I thought the first slide, not meant to be an advertisement, but I actually really liked this slide when I first saw it. Primarily because obviously it's an IT prioritization slide on the organization. But if you look at, obviously the first one is integration and processes, and I thought operational processes is interesting. But the counterbalance to that is if you go down to Hadoop adoption, you see that's the lowest of all of the options out there. And it's almost, to me, saying IT is looking at, hey, is more data necessarily better at this stage? Does that make us more agile just having access to more and more information? Or do we really need to get the operational processes in place first before we can take on and assume all of this amount of information hitting the enterprise? So I thought it was interesting because, always synonymous with big data is Hadoop. And yet big data was third, but Hadoop seemed to be very low in terms of the adoption curve here. So just kind of an interesting perspective from my end. You can go to the next one, Stefan. So we use this slide often, and kind of at a high level, you see the advent of social mobile cloud, big data coming together. And if you look at the gray area on here, that really represents historically IT's role in trying to streamline the organization, be more efficient, develop enterprise portals for the organization, streamline the number of vendors hitting the organization, so enable, do all the things to surface information to the line of business, to the employees more efficiently. And it was working really well until the advent of the Internet. And then the Internet kind of threw a disruptive curve at the IT organization, and all of a sudden, the consumerization of the enterprise started to happen, where the employees were bringing in social requirements and then mobile demands, and all these things hit at the same time, and you had disparate systems and disparate software coming in, and of course cloud now enables the line of business to go off and do their own thing and create even more apps. So a lot of this is about, the inclusion. We look at this as the processes. If you have good processes in place, it should enable the inclusion of more information. Without good processes, the logic dictates that you have to start to exclude and restrict the amounts of information. So I think the two of these things go together. If you have good in-house operational processes, it should make sense that you'll be able to include more sources, more information into the enterprise. If you don't, and logic dictates that you must try to restrict what can and can't happen inside the enterprise. So we'll kind of keep coming back to this idea of the process and integrating and including more information sources as we go through this. Okay, Stefan, go next. Kind of another way of looking at it, obviously lots of colors here. Red is bad and green is good. But if you look at the enterprise, the modern enterprise, behind the firewall to the left, reasonably good control over what happens inside the organization. But as you start to include more sources, and these sources aren't always controlled easily by the IT organization, right? Unless you're Walmart, it's very hard to mandate and dictate what your vendors can do and your suppliers can do. But for the most part, there's this dependency on agencies or your partners or your vendors to give you API access or some kind of access to information. So whenever you have a dependency model, always causes friction, always causes problem. And here, it's not so much, the red is bad because it costs a lot of money. It's really about time and the time it takes to drive value, to drive the information through the organization, the time it takes to do these integrations is really the underlying problem here. And so, if there's an API, for the most part, it works really well. But the API vendors and really the attack here, because it happens so quickly, is that a lot of vendors said, hey, we'll build connectors. And connectors is a great tactical solution. Is it a scalable, long-term, viable solution for the enterprise? Probably not. And so what is the platform that you're going to put in place to make inclusion part of of the enterprise, right? How do you include and offer more alternatives for the line of business? Because that's really what they're after. So you go to the next one, Stefan. And so in our world of a no dependencies model, we'll show you this, and we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, but we include everything, right? So we're able to integrate either behind the firewall or on-premise or in the cloud. It doesn't matter to us. We're agnostic, but we include all of these things. And this is what our customer base does. So they're able to include suppliers, for government regulatory compliance kinds of issues, competitive information, competitive intelligence, pricing information, all the social media stuff. And we are able to bring that in-house and make it part of the enterprise, make it, part of the stack that includes, making it searchable within the enterprise in a big data way, if you want to look at it that way. Go ahead, Stefan. So we'll kind of jump into a couple of use cases. I'll do the first one, and I'll hand it over to Stefan to do the second one. And I think you'll see in these two use cases a little bit different. In the case of Audi, a long-time Kapow enterprise customer since 2005, and we started out working with WebSphere in this case, where we were helping them integrate a lot of the in-house sources, that applications that didn't have access that they need to get to include into the WebSphere portal. And so they were one of our largest customers and been, very successful deploying Kapow in a lot of different areas. The one we most recently became involved in involved the MMI, and you can go to the next one, Stefan, their navigation system in the car. And I guess we just heard they won the most connected car of the year for 2012. But their MMI is their in-car nav system, and it incorporates a number of systems. But the key here is that when they were building this, they weren't trying to compete with another car nav system. That wasn't their competition. Their competition is really when a person gets in the car and they open up their iPhone and they start looking and searching on their iPhone. That was their primary competitor as they saw it. So they had to design a nav system that incorporated all of the kinds of things that an iPhone did, so that the user wasn't oriented towards opening up an iPhone, but would use the nav system. So the first thing they did, you can go to the next one, Stefan. So you can see how it works. They basically incorporated Google Earth primarily. Of course, they could use Google Maps, but Google Earth is really the graphic that how things are represented. They have their own Audi server capability, and then Kapow accessed the real-time access point. And the point here was they were actually trying to work with a lot of suppliers and vendors to provide access to the various kinds of feeds they were going to require to make this experience, meaningful. And it quickly became evident that it was very difficult to get access to as many different sources as they needed in the time that they needed to get it. And so, luckily, we, as a long-time customer of theirs, a vendor, one person recommended us, and we got involved with the project. And so now we become the real-time source of information. And the point here is there's no dependencies on Audi. They can basically connect to any source that they want to include in the Audi experience in the car. And if you think about it here, a couple of things, right? This is the Audi brand. So this has to work. This has to work in real time. This has to work on demand. And it has to be a powerful experience for the user. So unless you have an app store like Apple where you can control and create the environment that applications are going to be, written for and developed for, you need another way to get at this data. And so Kapow enables them to capture as much as they can from very different sources without any requirement on a supplier to give them an API or give them some access. They can do this very quickly. So this becomes a key component of the car. So if you're using an Audi, you'll see Google Earth. Unfortunately, you won't see powered by Kapow. But behind the scenes, we're really working with them on their server and accessing information. You can go to the next one, Stefan. And lastly, again, the byproduct of Kapow here is Stefan. This individual, Stefan, works at the Audi labs. And again, we talk about time to value. How quickly can you do things? And a byproduct of Kapow is is that now we're part of their continuous innovation life cycle. So because they can quickly develop and integrate disparate systems from all over, they're able now to try things out very quickly and fail quickly, fail fast, and recover and do something else. So prototyping and trying new things is totally powerful and possible now using Kapow. So a byproduct of it, but now it's some other avenue that they're exploring on Kapow, both internally and externally, to see how they could use us to try out new innovations for the organization. So Audi's one use case. It's obviously one of our bigger customers and a long-term customer. Stefan, I'll turn it over to Stefan, and he'll talk about a fairly recent customer. I think in the last year, Stefan, I think they became a customer.
Yeah.
A very different use case, but again, it's all about working around how quickly can you deliver results and how powerful can the results be and impactful on the organization. So I'll turn it to Stefan, and he can kind of walk you through the Pitt, Ohio example.
Yeah, so we're trying to go through a couple of examples here of our 500 customer base. Pitt, Ohio is a very different industry. It's in transportation and logistics, very, very thin margins, very competitive, big global vendors coming in, and a lot of manual processes. So some of the challenges they had, they need to automate manual processes to become more efficient. They need to lower the cost for acquisition of new customers, and they needed to lower the days outstanding for payments coming in and stuff like this. So the CIO of Pitt, Ohio was looking for a platform, and they are using Kapow for all of that, just like Audi, a strategic enterprise platform within Pitt, Ohio. Here is an example of a use case that they completely have automated with Kapow. They have something they call a prime subscription to clients, one of them being Volvo. So whenever Volvo wants to have a pickup at their facility, Volvo goes into their own internal logistics system and type in a request to get a pickup of something. That logistics system sends an email to Pitt, Ohio, and under their terms of service, Pitt, Ohio had to reply to this within 2 hours. So basically, they have full-time people just sitting there doing refresh on their email to check if there's a new order coming in. So when that order comes in, the person then types the data from that order into the internal logistics system and reads it back out, and then logs back in to their customers, in this case Volvo's internal logistics system over the web, and type in the information about the pickup. This was a process that took 2 hours of manual process for every single order coming in. So what they used Kapow for in this particular case was automatically monitoring the emails, then automatically reading the order out of the email. Here, for example, that they're going to pick up 1,000 kilos. And at that point, when they're typing it into the internal system, translating that to pounds. So Kapow is automatically doing all the transformation, applying all the business rules to this process, and then basically taking the data out of their internal Pitt, Ohio logistics system and typing it directly in automatically, basically doing automatic order entry at Volvo's external logistics system. So in this way, they cut 2 hours of manual process and an obligation of response time to be within 2 hours into a completely automated process where Volvo is getting that result into their logistics system on their side within a couple of minutes, completely automated. So this is the kind of things that they are using our product for. They are also using it for automatic credit and cash collection, so basically automatically going to all the payment agencies, checking if a customer has paid, if not, automatically setting out reminders, and by using Kapow for that, they basically got their days outstanding down by 5%. So needless to say, here is what they're using is Kapow's powerful management console, where you can actually go in and then schedule these automations to run at specific intervals. So obviously the process we just saw with the Volvo is running every minute and automatically doing that. But we have a very powerful collaborative management console interface, all web-based, that you can use to manage your automations, your integrations, and your data delivery processes. So needless to say, we have made the IT department at Pitt, Ohio heroes. We helped them move their business forward in a very difficult market, and they actually put a whole slideshow on the web. They've been talking to several logistics conferences about the success and the value they have of Kapow as an enterprise platform there.
So let me just, this is John again, so let me just summarize really quick. We picked these two for, two different reasons. One, Audi obviously is more interested in the innovation of using Kapow for new things, and obviously, margins aren't as sensitive as they are in the case of Pitt, Ohio, where this is all about managing the process for them. It's making sure that their processes are more streamlined, more cost efficient, because they're working on extremely tight margins. So if they can eke out a penny here or a penny there on every transaction, it means significant amount to the bottom line of the organization. So DSO, reducing DSO, is extremely important to them. So we deliberately picked these two to give you a sense of one company. Audi has been with us a long time. In the case of Pitt, Ohio, they're a brand new customer of ours, and in I guess about a year, we've become a pretty significant part of their infrastructure in IT. So just a little bit of perspective on it. So Stefan, you can take it.
So I know there is probably a lot of you out there thinking, okay, so tell me a little bit more about the product. How does this work? So let's go through that. So you can think about Kapow, the Kapow innovation, the Kapow Katalyst innovation, as we call it, as an application integration platform that can integrate to all the typical data and application sources that you need, like standard APIs like SOAP, REST, web services, .NET, file systems, FTP servers, XML feeds, RSS feeds, all of that, PDF files, Excel files, all of those standard components that you need to integrate to, we can do that. But the way you program our product is not by writing scripts or writing lines of code. It's completely without programming. It's done as flowcharts. It basically translate a business process or a data transformation process directly into a flow solution without coding. The other thing that we have built into our product is that we built an entire browser engine. We call it the Kapow Automation Browser that can automate the integration with anything that you can see in a browser and basically turn the entire web into a database or a business logic and leverage very, very quickly. And on top of that, we have, as I said earlier, a collaboration interface, web-based portal, user control-based, etc. I won't go too much into the architecture. You see it right here. You can look at the slides, but basically at the bottom we have all the different application data sources we support. Our product can run both on-premise and in the cloud. It runs in something we call clusters. That's completely scalable. The whole thing is controlled by your Active Directory LDAP server. On the right-hand side, you have our desktop environment product, the development environment, which you can think of as a combination of an XML editor, a web browser, and a visual flowchart editor with real-time visual feedback. And then on the top, you have the management console. So one of the things people always ask us is, how can you integrate to applications on the web that has no APIs? And the secret is our automation browser engine that's built into the product. If you think about a web front end today, it really consists of HTML as a layer, but inside HTML you have two parts. You can see that at the top here. You have the style and the layout, and you have the forms and the data, which I call the presentation logic. the key here is that we connect up directly to the presentation logic inside there, and the presentation logic is really the same as a REST service. So basically, we're calling the hidden REST services within the web front end itself, and thereby any web app is by default also a REST service interface. So this is what we can do. We can connect both with and without the APIs. And if we're going to the next slide, we can see our development environment. This is actually a form for a login to a web banking. This is our second largest bank in Germany, who service enable entire web bank with Kapow. And you know, they wanted to submit this form, and the way you find this form, actually find the application logic here within the presentation, is that you're looking anywhere on this page for something that has a signature, in this place, a class equal home login field. So you're attaching to this REST service to submit this form directly, and therefore we are completely ignorant of how the page looks and the style of layout. We're just hooking directly up to the logic and the data, and therefore it is as efficient and as robust as calling REST services. So a little bit about how we compare ourselves with ESB and cloud integration solutions. We can, of course, integrate to applications with our APIs. We can also integrate to any application on the web that does not have APIs. Alternatives typically cannot do that. We have the same robustness and integration as other enterprise class integration solutions out there. And for security compliance, you know, we are completely complying with the way that you access that application today, either through OAuth, SSL, etc., where many alternative solutions, because they cannot use the existing web SSL interface for that, you have to open up firewall, you have to open up direct database access, and thereby you open up security holes. So maybe, John, if you want to just wrap it up here, and we'll get finished.
Yeah, this is our last slide. So yeah, just kind of, you know, in terms of project costs and agility, in the last few here, I think at the highest level, you know, we are not a consulting company. We're not built to be a consulting company. So we have a real substantial product platform here that companies buy and they incorporate into their infrastructure. So we don't sell through consulting. You buy our product and it works out of the box pretty much. So, you know, we talk about agility, and I think for us agility means automation of these machine-to-machine things that go on in an organization, the processes, making that automation happen, making the integration to external sources happen by automation, right? Make the processes work. And I think across the board, you'll always hear from Kapow customers is how quickly we do things. And, you know, we don't talk about time to market so much because that's kind of a big company thing. That's what big companies or all companies talk about, time to market. That's very important. But on a business level, on an individual level, it's all about time to value. How quickly can I drive value out of the solution that you're providing? So for us, we're always focused on the time to value. How quickly can we drive value for the individual, for that unit in an organization, for the line of business? And that's really, for us, what it's all about. And again, this is an innovation, and this is a continuous innovation. So this is not a one-time thing. Using Kapow and using Katalyst, you know, our customers realize they're quickly able to adapt and do new things that they never thought were possible before, because they understand the platform and how it's used. And obviously, Stefan said there's the last thing. So on-premise or cloud, we're agnostic on all of that. So I think that wraps it up. I guess I turn it over to Robin is next. And if there's any questions, obviously we're here. Hopefully we answered a lot of questions for everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Robin, go ahead.
Okay, can you push my first slide, please? Okay, I thought that probably the best thing for me to do is to just kind of position what I think is going on with the emergence of a product like Kapow, because I think, personally, I've expected products of this nature to occur, and I expected them to emerge a little bit earlier, I guess, than they actually did emerge. Much of that was because when I first got on Mac, I started to play around with the interfaces and realized that you can stitch an awful lot of things together. If you know how to get at them, because the Mac's kind of built that way, but so is the Internet, and actually so is Windows. Anyway, let's talk about what the integration possibilities are. If you look at the diagram at the right, then you can see basically what I've depicted here is you can actually integrate things together at the presentation layer. You can also integrate them together at what I would call the application logic layer. You can also integrate things together at the database layer, depending upon what you want to do, depending upon how you want to integrate things. And if you kind of look at what happened over the past 10 years, I mean, first of all, we had the emergence of the service-oriented architecture, and that enabled integration in the middle, kind of application logic, but didn't focus much on either the presentation layer. There was nothing, actually, in the original enthusiasm for SOA where I saw any of the SOA software vendors caring much about the presentation layer. And at the same time, they didn't care much about the data layer either. There was pretty much nothing in SOA for the data layer. So while SOA was touted as the answer to everything for a period of time, it turned out to be an answer to some things, but actually it needed to evolve a bit. Web services, which were part of the standards on which SOA was based, they improved what you could do at the presentation layer. But web service was targeted primarily at web-based applications, so it was a, let's say, reduced set of things that you could go at just with web services. Then we have the whole of ETL and all the data integration tools that have come into existence, and they've done very well at the data layer, but they haven't really ventured beyond it. There are a few tools that are a little bit ambitious in going beyond it, but most of the data integration tools you come across are purely data integration for the data layer. And while all that's been happening in the past, and it's been said several times already, but in the past 10 years, we've also had, an explosion of applications anywhere. So we've got more sources, more targets, and more applications that we might want to stitch together. And we've also had the emergence of big data, which I like to depict as the world of events. Because, prior to the Internet, in computing terms, we always thought of transactions, and a transaction was somebody doing something until completion. Well, nowadays, we think in terms of events. An event is when someone clicks on a link, for example. Or it's when a sensor sends one piece of information about the flow of water along a pipe, or when it's when an RFID tag just records the fact that a particular object has passed an RFID reader. That's the world of events, and it's a world that's coming, and it's a world that is going to just make everything explode again. There's going to be even more sources, more targets, and more apps because of that. So that's my view of integration. Let's go on to the next slide. What this was based around, I was thinking when I was putting this presentation together that there was an attempt by Einstein to create a grand universal theory that explained all the four primary forces in the world of physics, and he spent most of his life trying to find it, and he never produced one. Physicists would, I think, be delirious if such a thing existed, and then they would be able to understand electromagnetic force, the weak and strong, nuclear forces and gravitation all in one blow, but they can't. And if you look at IT's got no grand universal theory either. There is fundamentally there's a split between a data-centric view of the world and an application-centric view of the world. And when you look at the data-centric, or when you speak to data-centric people, they're talking about MDM, they're talking about data governance, data life cycles, data semantics, and so on. And they are talking about integration, but when they talk about integration, they talk about the integration of data. And in the app world, you know, the big movement was so repository, so governance, and sticking together, and regard everything as a service, and for them, database was just something that happened to be a service that could throw data at you. You know, and they would talk about integration, but they would talk about integration in terms of the app layer, in terms of stitching one service to another service and putting a lot of services together in order to make a whole business process and so on. You know, and since we've had it,
participant lines muted.
Sounded like someone had their computer speakers on, so go ahead.
Okay. Complexity has been added by the cloud and mobile computing. Again, more sources, more targets, more apps. And it's again confuses these two worlds. And again, there's big data and the world of events that promises to complicate this. Go to the next slide. So what I was expecting to happen, and what I believe Kapow is it's a crossover product. The business world itself doesn't actually care whether IT is data-centric or process-centric. It cares that it can deliver services and the applications that work, that they need, and so on and so forth. If you want to have theoretical arguments about the nature of IT, then go ahead. But you know, what we want is we want the performance from the computer to do the things that we want. And I think that as a consequence, we're beginning to see the emergence of crossover products that are layer agnostic. They don't care whether they're data-centric. They don't care about being process-centric. They care simply about integrating. They care simply about threading stuff together, mashing stuff up, making it work. And I see Kapow as one of these products, nicely innovative in the way that it actually handles particularly websites. If you kind of think about it, you know, from the point of view of, let's say, the first slide, where we talk about, well, there's a presentation piece, an application piece, and a database piece. But if all that you can see of an application is the web page, then that's your only point of integration. And therefore, you need to be able to integrate there. So while other forms of integration might be reasonably useful within the corporation, as soon as we start to go into the internet and the cloud, they're not so useful in the sense of being able to get everything. And Kapow does have that virtue. And that's what I'm saying here. I think Kapow Katalyst is a crossover product. It has relevance to both worldviews, and you can probably satisfy requirements in both of those kinds of environment, the BI environment and the application-centric environment using Kapow. It doesn't seem to be particularly constrained. So let's go on to questions, and I'll see if I can ask some tough questions for these guys. So the first thing is, I mean, is in terms of the way that I've depicted it, but also in terms of the way that you see it. Do you see Kapow as complementary to, or do you see it as competitive with more traditional ETL products?
So that's a very good question, and it's something we hear a lot. So I have two answers to that. First of all, we are a partner with Informatica. We are one of the most popular downloads on their cloud service. So Informatica is in many ways viewed as a traditional ETL vendor, and still, you know, we are very good partners. So I think that speaks to that we're complementary, and what we deliver there is really the self-service, the no-coding approach to ETL. But then if we turn our head to another customer of ours, NetApp, who just actually last week launched their new website and their new search, customer B2B and consumer search based on Google Search Appliance. Kapow is actually the entire ETL platform, feeding, cleansing, transforming, adding metadata to the data behind that search engine. So here you can say we're completely competing with traditional ETL script and home, other ways of solving that problem.
Yeah, I'll just add, this is John, I think you just got to think about, we're all about applications, right? So, the world's moved into, web front ends and web-based views of information via in applications, whether they're in-house or external. So we play completely in the application space. That's really our bread and butter. That's our core competence. Informatica, their competency is in data, low latency, high volume data transactions. So, our sweet spot, if you will, is really when you're trying to figure out how do I make things possible with lots of these applications, both internal and external.
Okay, here's a quick technical question. One of the things, you are stitching an awful lot of things together, and you may be stitching a lot of things together that are in a lot of different places. So you could be connecting to 10 different websites. You could be connecting to the Amazon cloud, and you could be connecting at the same time to stuff within the data center. So how does resilience and failover work? How do you approach that? And what happens if you suddenly lose something, like a remote server goes out,
So there is a couple of answers to that. First of all, in November 2010, we launched our version 8 series with our Enterprise Edition, and with that, we launched a complete failover scalability into our products. You can basically set up our products to work in clusters of servers distributed over the world. It automatically selects the server that has the least work to do right now. So the whole scalability issue is solved right there, and we have customers running clusters of servers at multiple geographic solution areas. When you're talking real-time integration, and let's get back to the Audi A8, the A6, and A7, a person is making a real-time location-based query from within the car cockpit, and that particular service on the other end is not responding or something changed. There it is critical to have an extremely low, or let me say very low latency on recovery. So we put a lot of effort into our product that if something goes wrong, the time to recover is incredibly short. Basically, if something happens, you can get notified in all kinds of ways. You click on a link, it automatically opens up our design studio, our development environment through that link, apply the same input parameters to that specific request, and visually show you either in XML or on a web app or whatever it is, exactly where something went wrong. You fix it visually, no coding. You push a button, and it goes directly back into production. So very, very short recovery time is a key in those inevitable cases where something breaks, because we aren't better than what the API or the data source at the other end is in delivering something.
So if I build, because that's kind of an interesting comment you make. So if I build something that is accessing using some website somewhere to get me some kind of service from the website, maybe to grab a little piece of data that I want to stick in a form somewhere, and they do something radical, like they just, because they don't have to, they just create a new web page, which is different than the one I programmed Kapow for. What do you do in that circumstance? First of all, how do you find out that they suddenly did that? And secondly, how do you respond to it?
Well, so first of all, there is if you integrate through traditional APIs, which a lot of customers do, then you have the traditional change detection. But if you integrate through a web app, there is really two things that can change. One is the look and feel. And actually, those of you who have been using the Soho CRM system know that about a month ago, they completely changed Soho to look and feel, so any human that looks there would think that they completely redid the website. Actually, all of those customer hours who's doing front-end, presentation layer integration with Kapow had no disruption in service because we're hooking up to the REST services behind there, and they didn't change. So it's really in the situation where you're doing change to the underlying app server request where things change. And in that circumstance, your traditional SOAP APIs, et cetera, would likely also be changed because you're changing the underlying fundamental logic engine. And in that case, you have to detect the change and cope with it in ways that I just described.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's kind of move on to performance. I think performance is an interesting thing here. Obviously, if you build applications that are surrounding important business processes, you will probably have most of the assets that you're going to use under control within the data center, and therefore performance might not be such an issue. However, again, if you're connecting to stuff that's distant, making use of that, then there's two questions here. Clearly, you can't control the performance of anything that another company is particularly running. So the first question is, do you actually have performance monitoring within the console so you can get some idea if, like for instance, a website is just starting to perform poorly, and that might start creating latencies that were really unwelcome in the business process you're running?
So both when you develop our integration processes, we call them robots, you can actually see how they perform. It explains exactly how many instructions, how much memory it's using when you develop it. But then when you deploy that in production, you have that same measurement, and you can actually both measure, real-time elapsed and CPU time elapsed, memory, all of that you can monitor. Our product hooks up to systems like Tivoli, HP OpenView, so you can do complete real-time monitoring of the server, the memory, and the performance of the individual integrations directly from your typical systems there. So yes, you can do that. And, of course, it's a critical part of a company like Audi, again, where, they're serving real-time requests into the cockpit of their high-end cars. They need to understand the performance, and if something goes wrong, something changed, they need to get alerts and handle that.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I was kind of thinking when it is actually a very good, I think, case study, the Audi thing, because you can't really, if that system performed badly, you would know about it on the internet. Even if even if Audi were trying to hide it, it couldn't hide the fact that it wasn't delivering. Okay, I'm aware that you used in various contexts to do kind of ETL sort of things. So I was just kind of interested in what kind of metadata support. I mean, almost from a developer perspective, when I open up the development interface, if I just want to get some data out of a database, how do I do that? And the secondary question is, does Kapow keep a map of all the databases that it has contact with?
So in our development environment, again, we have the database view. So you can, when you develop our integrations, you can access and see all the databases. You can drop tables. You can alter tables. So there is a whole database viewer inside our development environment to deal with databases and tables. And then when you're running in production, you're hooking up to the same databases, and while it's running production, you don't really need to monitor changes at that point because you typically don't change your production database without changing your integration process as well. But the other thing about meta information, I think, applies more to the world of today. It's not only about structured data, which is what you have in a database. I would say it's unstructured, and I would call hybrid data which is both structured and unstructured. And in that world, we're seeing a huge growth of our product competing with traditional, completely unstructured ETL product. It's just pulling out unstructured data, like and not putting any meta information into it. If you are feeding data from social media networks, from customer support systems, etc., it is incredibly important that you, at the time of the ETL, attach the meta information that goes with the unstructured part of the data. So a customer might be writing in the customer support log, I have a problem with this and this product. When you ETL that data in for maybe a BI analytics solution, you need to attach, the product was this particular product. It was written at this particular time by this particular customer who is working for this particular company, etc. And then when you're then doing the analytics or the enterprise search on your other end, having this meta information gives you light years better results. So I think more in the hybrid space than ever is the attachment and the handling of metadata at the time of doing the extraction more and more critical.
Yeah, right. Interesting. No, if I understand it correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you actually have a comprehensive ability to connect to stuff. You can do it with desktop apps. You can go into Excel if you really wanted to, if people have got Excel spreadsheets lying around. You do web-based apps. You've got back-end data sources. You support a dramatic number of APIs, and that's very rich. What I'm really interested in here is what proportion of sites in your experience go beyond using it for web-based applications integration? Because, the way that I see it, I can see what you do very well, very fast, and I can also see that it's pretty much codeless to do that, linking a piece of software with several websites and pulling information and flowing it in the right way. But I'm kind of interested just in terms of where you sell, what proportion of sites are actually going beyond web-based application and using it to what I would say in more unusual ways than that?
So yeah, this is John, Robin. So I think historically we were very much the social media before social media was in vogue. We were always looking at external sources primarily, and I think as the social mobile cloud thing hit, the inundation on the IT organizations, they had to look for ways to do things quicker. So we've actually morphed, ironically, to a certain degree, back into the enterprise, into core IT, and are doing much more with processes and automating processes. In the case of Pitt, Ohio, it's kind of a hybrid of external and internal. But it's all about, for the enterprises, trying to do more with less, as they always say. And because we've proven ourselves, through the years we've been doing this, companies are more receptive. And I was saying earlier that, we were much more a reactive company. Vendors or customers would find us when, I would say the house is on fire, when they've exhausted all options and they can't figure out a way to do this. So they would, find Kapow and out of a desperate measure, plug us in, and we'd fix in-house things for them. But recently, we've become much more proactive and are out talking to enterprise customers. We're doing a lot in mobility right now where, as you said, stitching together disparate in-house systems to mobile enable them is a major problem in an organization because there's just systems were written 15 years ago and there's no way they're getting access to them. So how do you do this? How do you mobile enable these things? We do a lot in migration of information. Content migration is a big opportunity for us because we blend in search, making things searchable. So when you're trying to migrate content from one system to another, how do you also include vendors or partners or suppliers and make their information searchable? So ironically, as the social mobile cloud has emerged, and we were excited to see it and saw boundless opportunity. The irony is we're becoming much bigger inside the enterprise now than ever before. So recent opportunities are kind of mixed in terms of where it is, because we may enter doing one thing and we wind up getting wider. Stefan mentioned NetApps. We actually started over there in a content migration program, and now we're much wider in doing search and other things in the organization. So it kind of just depends on when they get it. Our customers really get it, and they start finding other uses.
Yeah, I can imagine that, and I imagine that your oldest customers are doing the more ambitious things simply because they started to just look at other targets.
Yep.
So specifically, what do you regard as a sweet spot for Kapow? In other words, really what I'm actually after here is if there's, if there's anybody listening, for instance, that has a very, very specific problem, where you think Kapow just kind of beats everything simply because either other things can't do it or other things cannot do it well. So what do you regard as sweet spot as being?
I think it's primarily, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, it's applications, right? If you're talking about applications, whether they're in-house or external, and you need to make these things harmonious. How do I automate a machine-to-machine integration? How do I take a manual process of people cutting and pasting, or people, moving information around in a manual way? Or how do I get data trapped in an application that I never thought I could get out because there's not an API? But the key is also how quickly can I do it? This is all about the speed by which we do it and the accuracy. So for us, we message, if you go to our website, we message to mobile. We don't have a mobile front end, but we mobile enable. We make the mobile possibilities there. We do content migration. Everybody thinks content migration is a laborious consulting engagement. It is if you don't have a product. So we do that very effectively. But in external, pricing automation, how do I automate the change of price of my competitors? How do I look at information of what my competitors are doing on a daily basis, sometimes hourly basis, if they're changing their prices, kind of like the gas pumps changing, by the minute? How do I monitor this? How do I do brand reputation? So it's pretty wide, but it all centers around applications. And for us, an application is an in-house one or a website. That's an application to us, and we treat it the same because, we have, as Stefan mentioned earlier, we have a browser. We built our own browser, so we can look at the underpinnings of any application, see how it's constructed, and access it.
And so if you're thinking back at the original picture that John showed with the explosion of apps and data sources, that's our sweet spot. In today's world where applications are out of your control, there is more and more legacy, and you have data and applications everywhere. The more spread your applications are, the more data are spread around, the higher the value of Kapow, because we deliver very high agility on the integration itself. If you only have a couple of few silos, that's less of the sweet spot. The more, spread, the bigger the sweet spot.
Okay. Quickly, what is the pricing model? I mean, I always ask this question. I think most analysts ask this question on the briefing room. Basically, I mean, you don't need to actually throw out prices, but what's the pricing model?
So we're an enterprise class product, and we're a subscription. So we charge an annual fee for the product, and it comes in, depending on the use case to a certain degree, and the amount of information, and not the amount of information, but the size of the opportunity. And we really scope it based on, is this going to be a real-time monitoring event, or is it a much more of a, once-a-day kind of integration? Depends on really the project, but it's a subscription-based enterprise class product.
Okay, and the final question I've got is, who do you meet in competition? But one of our listeners has asked, how does your functionality compare to Denodo, which partly overlaps that of Kapow? So part of the question, I guess, is, do you meet Denodo in competition?
Well, I'll let Stefan address it technically, but I don't know Denodo that much. I've never really bumped into them, so maybe we're operating in different worlds. We're very focused on what we do. We don't try to do much more than, again, talk about integrating and making processes more efficient. So we don't have a front end to the product. We're really kind of in the integration space. But I don't know, Stefan, do you have a perspective on it?
Well, one of the main differentiators, you're looking back at the slide where we have the Kapow Innovation I showed earlier, is that we have built in the Kapow automation browser into our product. We're the only integration company that I know of on the market today who have built a purpose-built way of integrating to the application logic in the presentation layer. There is other companies that can do some of that, but they are all using an existing engine browser like IE, which was not built for that, and therefore is extremely fragile, doesn't scale, and so on. So, you know, that's one major differentiator from them, you know. Otherwise, yeah.
Well, I mean,
okay, good.
Good enough answer. There's also a question that someone's put in that you might like to field. Are you a federation server?
Excuse me, what was the question?
Are you a federation server?
You can say that. You know, our product can do federated integration. It can do virtual integration, if that would talk about it. So our product can either do you know, move data from A to B, or it can basically virtualize the data or virtualize the apps into one API. So our product can take multiple APIs, and you can build business logic around that, and then make basically a composed or federated API that behind the scene, you know, leverages multiple other APIs. If that was a question.
Yeah, I think that was. That's how I would have understood the question. Anyway, okay, Eric, I'll pass it back to you if.
Okay, good.
Got any further questions?
Sure, I got a couple other that I'll throw out at you guys. It's a very, very good presentation, by the way. Let's kind of dig into some of the nuts and bolts. We have a couple people asking about change data capture. So, are you using CDC, and do you use your own proprietary database, or do you use MySQL or some other database?
So we believe in self-service. We believe in very fast installation. So when you get our product, and you can get a trial from our website, and you install it, it includes a database that it installs, and you basically hit next 3 times and install. You can start working with it. But obviously, being an enterprise platform, you can swap that out with any database on the planet. So, well, all the major ones like DB2 and MySQL and Oracle and so on. So yes, we both have one built-in, and we support whatever you have.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Sorry, from a data capture standpoint, our servers, and one of the reasons our servers scale linearly is because they're stateless. So we don't capture data within our server within the integration process itself. But we have built-in mechanisms in our product to store the data in databases, store the data in caching, and retrieve it in real time. So if you're making a request to one server if you have a real-time location and one request goes to one server and the next request goes to another server, that server can retrieve that and basically continue where it was, so to speak. But we're using external databases or caching mechanisms to do that.
Okay, good. And I have a couple more questions. We'll go a little bit long here if that's okay with you guys. So what role does metadata play? And do you have some kind of an optimizer that will, for example, notice that a particular process you've automated can be shortened by using data from another process? Is there any kind of recommendation engine or optimizer, and what role does metadata play in Kapow?
Well, it sounds like that was 2 questions, and I'm not exactly sure what you mean about the metadata, because metadata can be so many things. I think we discussed it earlier, but you know, our product will automatically detect if like a database table changes that it's actually using and stuff like that. Or can you be more specific about the question around metadata?
Yeah, in terms of metadata, I was just interested to know if there is any kind of a metadata repository that is maintained with any kind of a data dictionary attached to it, such that as someone is automating new processes, they can get a look at some of that metadata that's already been used?
Okay, so one is, of course, when you want to redo something, metadata, for example, if let's say you are building a virtual or federated API to 5 different applications who are delivering same kind of data. You build a signature of that, and of course, yes, you store these signatures and these metadata information in our shared repository on the management console, and everybody can share that and leverage that and use that signature of those data definitions. But another thing which is extremely important when you do reuse is also reusing fragments or segments. We call them snippets of integration. So we have this thing built into our product. We can build snippets. So let's say I have a snippet that log in to an application, and then I want to do 5 different integrations that logging into the same application. I can share and maintain that snippet only once. And again, these snippets are built completely with no coding in our visual flowchart editor. So it was a very powerful way of cutting down maintenance cost and reuse of not only metadata but also integration logic, so to speak.
That's great. That's really interesting. And the last question I'll throw out at you here is just kind of one to try to understand exactly how the technology is working. Obviously, there are lots of applications that let you create macros like Microsoft Word or Excel, even Photoshop or some design programs allow you to create little macros that will walk you through a process and automate that process. That's exactly what you're doing. Is that how the system, usually the way those work is you get to the point where you're about to start the process you want to automate and you click some kind of a record button, and then you just manually go through and do all the clicks and selections that you want to be automated. And then you can kind of point that at a file folder, for example, or you can point that at a series of files and say, okay, now go and perform that task to all those files. Is that similar to how you're recording these automations? Does someone actually manually go through while a recording engine is on, and that's how you actually get the process automated?
So that's a very, very good question. So when I hear the word recording, I think fragile, because if you record something and something changes in that process, you have to redo the recording. So we do not do recording. But the other thing that I have to say is that a recording is always working on live data. And we do support that paradigm. We believe that rather than coding to definitions of APIs and definitions of data, metadata, you develop towards real APIs and real XML files. So we have this paradigm of developing against real data in real time, and that also means that when you develop our product, you're seeing the results in real time, and when you're done building your automation process, for example, or your integration, you're actually testing it at the same time as developing it. So I would say we have some of the best from a recording technology, so to speak, combined with the robustness of building things in a programmatic fashion where you can go in and change it, edit it, redo it, and run it with different test data at any time.
Okay, and you just actually, I think, answered one of the last questions that came in here, which is, does your technology provide any profiling capability? And I guess what you're telling me is the answer is yes, because you're always using the live data, right?
That's correct. So you're verifying the result in real time as you build, which is a very unique, actually a very unique differentiator from Denodo, as we talked about before. There's real-time instant verification when you develop. Gives you really high productivity and high agility.
Yeah, and that's all part of the point we make about time to value. This is all about how quickly and how accurately you can deliver results. So that's part of the workflow editor and the workflow product of Design Studio that we talked about as part of Katalyst.
Okay, great. So let me throw one last one at you here. We had a bunch of other interesting questions, but I think we've mostly covered them. And folks, if you feel a question you asked was not answered, don't be shy. Go ahead and email me directly after the show, and I'll forward it on to our friends at Kapow. I'm wondering, I guess what you've really done here is you've created a library essentially of functionality, as you say, of REST-based or SOAP-based functionality, and that's what allows you to deal in a fairly agile way with any changes to web browsers that come out, because I, for one, live in a multi-computer, multi-platform world, partly by design because we do so much web work. So I've got old PCs, new PCs, old Macs, new Macs, all these different browsers, and the functionality changes from page to page. I mean, not just the design, but the functionality and what certain keys will generate. I guess I'm just kind of curious to know, how do you manage change? Is there basically a centralized repository that when some change to Internet Explorer comes out, you publish that out to all your existing subscribers, or how does that work?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question because we're not using Internet Explorer. You know, we have our own browser, and you know, we're integrating to applications.
Oh, I see.
Who themselves support different browsers, and you know, they only, you know, so let me answer the question in a different way. Our automation browser built into Kapow Katalyst can mimic any browser. So if the website expects that you are a Safari or a Chrome, you know, then we can emulate that. So if that's the only thing they work with, but that's fine. But I think it's also important to understand here that when our product is running in production, we're not rendering anything. We're hooking up to the logic in the presentation layer, the presentation logic. So we don't care how it looks. We don't care which images is being loaded and so on. We're just looking at the logic, and we're calling the REST services that's embedded inside the application, so to speak. Just like any other integration platform would be calling REST services.
Okay, very, very good answer. Very good answer. You answered my question. I think this is very interesting stuff, folks. We've been talking to Stefan and John from Kapow Technologies, Kapow Software. Thank you so much for stepping into the briefing room. Big thanks to Robin Bloor out there for his analysis. And I really like that IT is gutless. I think that's pretty good stuff. So, folks, we'll have this archive ready fairly shortly. You can feel free to come back or go to insideanalysis.com. Look under webcasts, and that's where you can find the briefing room. So big thank you to you guys out at Kapow. Very good job today. We appreciate your time and attention, and now let's go ahead and end the event. So Rebecca, our producer, go ahead and go through the process and end the event. Thanks again, folks. Catch up to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.